Allie DePew, and today we're here to talk about some tips for connecting with students during an interactive distance learning event. We want to make sure that the goal of an interactive distance learning experience truly is interactive and that the students are always engaged in the learning. Here are some tips to help you through this process. We're going to start with a big question. Why are you here? Now, I'm actually referring to why are you in the classroom? Are you going to be in the classroom as a role model? Are you a resource for students that are maybe working on a project? Or are you a guest that has been invited in by an organization or by the teacher? Regardless of why you're here, what we want to work on is making this the most engaging and interactive experience for these students. So just a few things to think about ahead of time. First is, how much time will you have? Typically, we see presenters coming in for about an hour. Another question is this a series? Will you be returning? Or is this a one-time event? When you start thinking about things in terms of one-time events versus series, it'll help you in planning what information and what activities you're going to do with your students and how to space them out. So first, let's go ahead and take a look at the goal, topic, or the theme of your presentation or interactive distance learning event. We want to make sure that we pick one or two main points. If we try to cram too much information in, that won't allow for enough interactivity and also student discussion time. So really pick the two, what we like to call golden nuggets, and build your presentation and your event around those two golden nuggets. We also want to have learning outcomes. A learning outcome is something that the student will be able to demonstrate or do. So as you're going through your presentation, think about the end and start with the end in mind. The first thing we want to do in our presentation is build a relationship with the students. One of the best ways to do that is through personal anecdotes. Really get the kids thinking, open up to what you do and why you're here. It'll also build some credibility with the students, which is a really important aspect. I sometimes have individuals come into the studio and they say, well, what should we talk about? What do we do? And I'll often give the advice to tell a story that relates to the goal or the theme or the topic and their student outcomes that we've talked about. So for example, wildlife biologists will sometimes come into the studio, and perhaps it's a bear biologist telling the story about maybe the first time you touched a grizzly bear. That's a pretty powerful story. There's not that many students that have had an experience of touching a grizzly bear. Or perhaps it's a research scientist that comes in. Well, what do you do? Well, I spend my entire day doing research. Well, what does that look like? And through that research, what are you trying to achieve? Well, maybe it's research that's based on traumatic brain injuries, and you got into the field because someone you know experienced a traumatic brain injury. In addition to personal anecdotes, we want to think about creating connections with the students. And there's several ways to do this. We can do that through introductions, your own, thinking about a clever way to introduce you as a person. Maybe there's music or images that really relate to you as a person, places you've traveled, things you like to do. Those can help build that relationship with the students. Additionally, having the students introduce themselves to you will help build that relationship. If you're talking to many students, you can have the class introduce themselves, you could have them introduce the town that they live in, or they could introduce themselves if it's a smaller group that you are working with. Another trick is to play a quick game or have a team building activity up your sleeve and ready to go. So I've seen presenters that use activities that get kids up and moving, where you're going to do a repeat after me activity where you shake one hand, then you shake another hand, and you get your brain moving and you get your body moving. That's fantastic. I've had presenters come in that will do word associations. So we recently had a presenter that came in to talk about the United States and Iranian relations, and he chose a word association game where he said, okay, I want you to think about the words that you associate with the word Iran and the words that you can associate with the word Persia or Persian, and then move on from there. Another thing that you can do is have students turn and talk and give a personal weather report. So, what is your personal weather report? Are you sunny and optimistic today? Are you partly cloudy? Is there a big storm brewing? Once you've done a relationship building activity or introductions, we're going to go ahead and move on to the main content and the purpose of why you're here, connecting with students and interacting with students. So we always want to make sure that our content is either hands-on, minds-on, or both. So let's just take a minute to identify what the difference between hands-on and minds-on activities are. So hands-on activities are activities that are hands-on, such as a student participating in a science experiment. Maybe there's an art project that's associated with what you're doing that day, or even the use of a simple graphic organizer to take notes. These would all be hands-on activities. Minds-on activities are things that really get the creative juices flowing, the mind working, and open up for discussion. So minds-on activities could be games, challenges, questions, or discussions. When you're working with students, one of the things that we really want to stay away from is lecturing for long periods of time. We want to really keep that engagement high with the students. So let's talk about that for a moment, and let's talk about how we do that in a minds-on activity. First, I want to start with the idea of a driving question, a deep question, or a critical thinking question. Really what these questions are, there are lots of different words for saying that this is a question that is going to use critical and creative thinking. These questions are going to move the discussion forward, and they're going to help make learning stick. So when we think about discussion questions, we're going to think about first a framing word to start our questions. So a framing word could be how do, should, could, etc. We're going to then pair it with a person or an entity. So how could I, how can we, how do we as students, how do we as scientists, or even something bigger like how could the nation, how could the country, how could my town. We're going to then pull in an action word or a challenge word. How could the nation build? How could the nation design? How could I build? How could I solve? How could you solve? Then we're going to combine it with an audience or a purpose. So for example, a real-world problem or a specific group of people. So let me go ahead and give you some examples of deep questions or driving questions. So how do we, as teachers, implement authentic learning experiences for students? How do wildlife biologists design non-invasive studies of bears for determining delisting qualifiers? Or how about, how can you as a student use trash in a work of art to inform the town about the need to decrease littering? This will really help build that minds-on philosophy. I also want to talk about interactive learning strategies that are very quick and very easy to use with distance learning. So here's the first one. Very easy. It's the simple thumbs up, thumbs down, or to the side. We can use this in, if you agree, thumbs up. If you disagree, thumbs down. If you're not sure, thumbs in the middle. You can use that with a lot of different topics and polls or opinions. Another strategy that we really love is the turn and talk. I'm going to go ahead and give you students 30 seconds to turn to your neighbor and talk. Once you've come up with an idea, we are then going to pick one representative from each group, from each school, from each classroom, to go ahead and share with the other students what your ideas are. Ready, go. Give them 30 seconds, or a little bit more if they're really engaged, and then bring them back. Another is the use of graphic organizers. So this is a visual way to organize information so that the brain will remember it. This could be a chart that students help fill in. It could be a concept map or a form of note-taking. There's many different types of graphic organizers that you can use and that the students can use. Another way is to pose a problem or give a task for the students to solve. Remember, it's okay for the students to go and break into groups and spend some time working when you're not speaking and on camera. This allows the students to really engage, go deep into the discussion, and then be able to come back and ask thoughtful questions, present interesting solutions and meaningful answers. If you're working in a series, this is a really wonderful way to leave the students at the end of your first interaction by saying, here's the problem for you to solve. Over the next week, I want you to work in groups. We're going to start off our next event by each team or group presenting what their solutions are and moving forward. As we come to the end of our presentations, we really want to think about student-directed learning and how those students are going to take this information into the classroom once you have gone. We always want to connect back to our goal, make sure that we're really referring to those student outcomes and hitting on those key points. We want to think about resources for the students that we can give them that they can then explore and research on their own. We oftentimes want to leave them with discussion questions that they can then come back to after they've had time to absorb and process some of the information and discussions that you have had with them during the class period. And then, of course, setting challenges or goals for those students and a way for them to be accountable or to share those with you as the presenter. I have also included some graphic organizers and some other materials to help you prepare for an interactive, engaging presentation. Thanks so much.